Life is not just what lies before our eyes. It is poetry, dreams, and the distant things that call to us. Yet amid the chaos of reality, how many of us have the courage to set aside our worries and listen to that faint whisper from deep within? We often talk about journeys, about freedom, about living a full and meaningful life. But then morning comes, the alarm rings, and we hurry to blend into the rushing crowd, to finish our tasks, our meetings, our responsibilities, our bills, only to return home with a weary body and an empty soul. Day after day, we put on the same familiar roles. We live properly, neatly, even right in the eyes of others. But somewhere beneath those roles, there's a quiet emptiness, a place where an old dream still struggles to breathe. And sometimes, in the silence of a late night, we find ourselves wondering, how long has it been since I truly knew who I am? The novelist Somerset Maugham once wrote in the Moon and Sixpence, "Most people become what they must be, not what they want to be." A simple line, yet it reflects the quiet tragedy of modern life. The moon stands for our ideals, the longing to live truthfully, to create, to be free. The sixpence represents reality, the food, the work, the responsibilities, and the price of stability we keep holding on to. And between these two worlds, we stand still. On one side, the gentle glow of the moon, fragile, distant, but heartbreakingly beautiful. On the other, the gleaming coins in our hands, solid, tangible, and safe. But the more tightly we cling to them, the farther that moonlight drifts away. Will you choose to look up and chase the moon, even if it means walking alone, in the dark, under the laughter of the world? Or will you bow your head and pick up the sixpence of reality, the thing that promises safety, yet slowly lulls your heart to sleep? Perhaps there is no absolute answer, but one thing is certain. Life is not about merely existing. It is about living with awareness. To live is to learn to understand yourself, to face those small inner voices you once left behind in the noise. Because only when you know what truly moves you, what makes your heart light up, do you begin to truly live. And the Moon and Sixpence is exactly that reminder, that when a person dares to give up everything just to live truthfully with themselves, they may lose the whole world, but they find their own soul. Because to live truthfully is not to escape, but to return. Not to rebel, but to awaken. Perhaps that is also why you are here, with me. This is Juliana Grey, where we search together for simple yet profound philosophies of life, so that each morning we wake up not with a sigh, but with a quiet gratitude for still being here, for still being able to feel, and for still being ourselves. Here, every book is more than just pages. It is a mirror reflecting the soul. And every minute of listening is one step closer to yourself, to peace, to truth, and to the soft light of the moon that shines within your own heart. Awareness determines the life you pursue. Perhaps each of us has once asked ourselves, if we could live again, would we dare to live differently? Amid the chaos of reality, among limits and responsibilities, few have the courage to leave behind what's familiar in order to find themselves again. But once, there was someone who did, someone who dared to step out of his comfort zone, who was willing to trade an entire life for the one thing that could make his soul come alive again. His name was Strickland. Strickland seemed like an ordinary man. A steady job, a gentle wife, 2 well-behaved children, and a life others would call admirable. Everything about him was safe, proper, and orderly. Then, one quiet night, he walked away from his warm London home, leaving behind his wife, his children, his career, and the life that seemed so complete. He left with only a small suitcase, to start over in Paris with a single dream, to become a painter. People called him mad. They couldn't understand why a man who already had everything would abandon it all for a dream with no guarantee. But Strickland was not mad. He was simply one of the few who dared to live truthfully with his own soul. He wasn't running away from his old life. He was returning to his essence, to that voice deep inside him that had never gone silent. Most of us, however, live like Strickland before he left, living out our roles, but not truly living as ourselves. We play the good child, the devoted colleague, the kind partner, the roles that make us loved and respected. Yet when night falls, in the quiet of our room, we can hear the faint sigh of our own soul. A part of us slowly withers, not from a lack of comfort, but because it's been too long since we last lived as who we truly are. A stable life is not a bad thing. Stability is something everyone longs for, but when that stability makes us repeat each day unconsciously, when waking up in the morning becomes nothing more than a duty, when we know we are merely existing and no longer living, that is when tragedy begins. Because the death of the soul often comes long before the death of the body. Strickland didn't leave out of selfishness. He left because he had reached the limit of living for others. He stepped out of his comfort zone, not to seek fame or glory, but to save the part of his soul that was slowly being suffocated. He was willing to trade love, honor, and respect for one more chance to feel alive. People called him cruel. But sometimes, being cruel to others is lighter than being cruel to yourself. Only those who have ever felt alive yet not truly living can understand why someone would abandon everything, just to breathe with their own breath again. Between Strickland and us, there is not much difference. The only difference is, he took the step, while we remain standing still. We too long for freedom. We too dream of a more meaningful life, yet we build walls of safety around ourselves. We fear loss. We fear judgment. We fear disappointing the expectations of others. But it is precisely that fear that makes us lose our souls the fastest. So pause for a moment. If you were not bound by fear, by expectations, or by responsibilities that weigh you down, how would you choose to live? Would you dare to take even one small step toward the life your heart truly desires? Sometimes the most foolish choice is also the one that makes us feel most alive. Strickland, in his solitude and in the world's eyes of madness, was not insane. He was awake. He dared to trade every sixpence to find the moon that belonged only to him. And we, those still bending down to gather our shining coins, have we ever dared to look up? To realize that the moon has always been hanging there, quietly waiting in the sky of our own lives? Each person has their own order of priorities. No one is wrong for choosing their own path. The only mistake is living in conflict with your own heart. Strickland's wife once had a peaceful home, a successful husband, and a family any woman would dream of. But when he left, she didn't collapse. The pain of being abandoned shook her deeply, but it also awakened her. She realized that in this life, no one can be your support forever. So she started over, learning to type, opening a small shop, doing everything she could to raise her children, to survive, and to stand firmly on her own feet. She didn't choose art like her husband. She chose independence, dignity, and the quiet pride of being in charge of her own life. In her eyes, the highest value was to be respected by others and to hold her head high before the world. And what's admirable is that she lived true to that choice. As for Strickland, he chose art, he chose freedom, he chose a life that others called madness. But for him, it was the only way to truly live. He might have been poor and alone, but he never compromised. He painted until his very last breath, because that was the only way he knew how to exist completely. They were both strong, only different in awareness. One saw freedom as everything, The other saw stability as peace. One reached for the light of the moon. The other held tightly to the solid sixpence in her hand. Neither was wrong. They simply followed different values. The order of our priorities reflects the values we believe in. Some choose peace, some choose passion, and both are worthy, as long as they feel no conflict within their choice. When we understand why we walk the path we do, we stop envying, stop comparing, and stop tormenting ourselves between right and wrong. Perhaps you, too, are standing at that same crossroads, between duty and dream, between stability and the faint call of your heart. We fear leaving, yet staying brings no peace either. We grow tired of trying to please everyone, except ourselves. And one day, you'll have to ask yourself, are you living for what you choose, or for what others expect of you? There is no perfect choice. Every path has its price, but happiness doesn't come from choosing the right direction. It comes from understanding why you chose it. When we live with awareness, we stop blaming, stop fearing, and stop envying the lives of others. Because then we understand everything that happens is exactly the journey our soul needs to go through. And perhaps, like Strickland and his wife, we will one day realize differences are not distances, but mirrors, reflecting ourselves back to us, reminding us that true happiness doesn't lie in what we have, but in knowing what we are truly living for. The way we see life determines the way we treat others. There are people who seem born to give, even when all they receive in return is pain. Struve was one of them, a gentle, kind-hearted, and somewhat clumsy painter. He had no great talent, no fame, but he possessed a warm heart and a pure soul. When Strickland fell ill and was shunned by everyone, it was Struve who brought him home and took care of him, despite his wife's desperate objections. He believed that inside every person, no matter how cruel or cold, there still existed a part that could be saved through kindness, but fate can be cruel. It was Struve's own wife, the woman he loved with all his heart, who fell for Strickland, the very man he had protected and cared for. She left Struve to follow him, only to be abandoned, broken, and driven to end her life in despair. When Struve heard the news, he was devastated, but even in his pain, he held no hatred, only quiet forgiveness. People called him foolish, saying that no one is more pitiful than a kind man in a ruthless world. But Struve was not weak. In truth, he was free, because he refused to let hatred rule him. He understood that if he allowed resentment to take over, his heart would be forever locked in darkness, and he would not let the wrongdoing of others destroy the last pure part of himself. In a world where everyone rushes to protect themselves, kindness has become a form of courage. To keep one's heart uncorrupted, you must be willing to be hurt, to go against the current, to keep believing in goodness when the world only teaches you to doubt. Perhaps you, too, have once been like Struve, loved someone deeply, been misunderstood, given more than you received, yet still chosen to remain kind, because you know, if you lose your kindness, you lose the most beautiful part of your humanity. The way we see life shapes the way we treat others. Those who see the world through suspicion will live in constant defense. Those who see it through understanding will learn to let go. And those who see it through love will always find peace, no matter how much pain they endure. So ask yourself, will you choose to keep your kindness, even if it makes you look weak? Or will you choose coldness for the sake of safety? There is no easy answer, but perhaps only those who dare to stay pure in a wounded world truly understand what freedom means. Kind people may get hurt, but they never lose themselves. Because kindness, even when rejected, remains the only light that makes this world a little warmer and allows us to be ourselves in the truest way possible. When perception changes, freedom appears. The greatest prison in this world is the human mind. Philosopher Schopenhauer once said that what binds our lives is not circumstance, but the way we think about it. Some people live amid luxury, yet keep their souls locked in invisible cages. Others, though they have nothing, feel as light as the wind. Freedom, in truth, is not about where we go, but how we see the life we live. When Strickland left London for Paris, he wasn't only searching for art, he was searching for freedom. A freedom beyond judgment and convention, beyond the musts and shoulds that had made him live like a shadow of himself. For him, freedom meant living true to the voice within, even if the cost was loneliness, poverty, and being misunderstood. His wife, too, chose freedom, but in her own way. After being left behind, she didn't collapse. She stood up, learned typing, earned her living, and built her independence. For her, freedom meant holding her head high and being in control of her own life. And Struve, the gentle painter, chose freedom in the kindest way. Freedom from hatred. Though betrayed and broken, he chose forgiveness, because he understood that only by letting go could he truly release his soul. 3 people, 3 different paths, yet all shared one thing in common. They changed the way they saw life. And when perception changes, freedom appears. Freedom has no single form. For one, it means leaving. For another, staying. For the strong, it means stepping forward. For the compassionate, it means letting go. True freedom is not about abandoning everything. It is about no longer being ruled by fear or desire. We often think freedom means escaping, leaving the job, the relationship, the responsibilities that weigh us down. But the truth is, we can walk away from everything and still not be free if our mind remains chained by fear, by the hunger for approval, by comparison and resentment. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the state of no longer being controlled by them. When the mind is at peace, every place becomes freedom. When we no longer strain to prove, to chase, to be loved. Even within small boundaries, our hearts feel vast and open. Freedom doesn't come from breaking things apart, but from looking inward and smiling in quiet acceptance. Perhaps right now, you too feel bound by your work, by others, or by expectations that weigh on you. But ask yourself, are those chains truly from the outside or from the fear growing inside your own heart? Because real freedom does not lie in where we go. It lies in how we see. When perception changes, the whole world within us changes too. And sometimes, all it takes is a moment to pause, to breathe deeply, to gently let go, and you'll realize the door of your prison was never really locked. Happiness begins when we stop trying to prove ourselves. When you no longer need to prove anything, that's when happiness begins. We live caught between 2 fears. The fear of not being recognized and the fear of not being good enough. From childhood, we've been taught to live by certain molds. Study hard to be praised, work tirelessly to be valued, love the right person to be respected. Our whole life becomes a series of efforts to be seen, to prove that we too are worthy. But strangely, the more we try to prove ourselves, the smaller we begin to feel. We keep climbing the ladders others built, and one day we look back, realizing we no longer know where we're headed. We may have succeeded in the eyes of the world, yet quietly lost the battle with ourselves. Happiness isn't found at the end of the paths others have drawn for us. It comes when we pause, take a deep breath, and allow ourselves to simply be, to be ordinary, to be imperfect, to slow down, to be soft. Because only when we stop performing for others When we no longer try to live up to someone else's idea of enough, do we finally touch that gentle ease within the soul? The greatness of a person does not lie in how many people know their name, but in whether they dare to live true to who they really are. Some find meaning in conquest. Others find joy in simplicity, waking up early, cooking a small meal, sitting by the window as sunlight filters through the leaves. Sometimes, that alone is enough to feel content. True maturity isn't about being the most successful person, but the most peaceful one within their own choices. Peaceful when saying no to what isn't meant for them. Peaceful when they don't need to be understood, as long as it feels right inside. Peaceful when their life moves in rhythm with their heart. We've spent so many years trying to become someone better, stronger, more admired. But in the end, the greatest journey is not about finding a new self. It's about returning to the self we left behind. Coming home to what we once took for granted. A good night's sleep, an honest conversation, a moment when we don't need to pretend to be strong. You don't have to become anyone else. Just be yourself, with all your flaws, your scars, and your unfinished dreams, because sometimes it's those very imperfections that make us human, and only when we dare to look at ourselves with compassion do we truly understand what happiness means. Happiness is not a reward waiting at the end of the road. It's the way we walk every single day, when we stop straining to be loved, stop comparing to feel enough. It's when we can smile, not because everything is perfect, but because we are grateful for what already is. In the end, happiness isn't measured by how much we have, but by how light we feel when we no longer need to prove anything at all. And in that moment, when the heart stops running and the mind grows quiet, we finally begin to live. The moon and the sixpence, both are necessary. The moon and the sixpence may seem like opposites, but in truth, they are two halves of a single life. The moon represents dreams, the longing to live truthfully, to touch beauty, freedom, and the infinite within one's soul. The sixpence stands for reality, bread and shelter, duty and stability, the small but necessary things that allow us to exist. We are born between these two worlds, one ruled by the light of ideals, the other pulled down by the gravity of daily life. And each day, we walk the tightrope stretched between them, afraid to fall, yet unable to stop moving. A person who never dares to dream becomes barren, like dry earth without rain. But one who only dreams and forgets reality will forever lose themselves in illusion. The moon lights the way, but the sixpence keeps our feet on the ground. Without the moon, we lose direction. Without the sixpence, we cannot go far. Strickland chose the moon, to live fully for his passion, even at the cost of loneliness and pain. His wife chose the sixpence, stability, dignity, and the pride of standing on her own 2 feet. And Struve, between heartbreak and forgiveness, chose freedom through kindness. They were all different, yet each sought the same thing: balance. Balance between the moon and the sixpence, between dreams and reality, between the soul and the everyday life that sustains it. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this story leaves us, that we don't have to choose between two extremes. We don't have to give up the moon to hold the sixpence, nor throw away the sixpence to reach for the moon. What matters is knowing what guides us, knowing when to look up and dream, and when to look down and live. Life does not demand perfection. It only asks that we stay awake enough not to lose our soul in the noise. Dreams give us reasons to live. Reality teaches us how to live. A heart that dreams gives life meaning. A mind that understands reality makes that dream endure. There will be days when all we see are the sixpences, heavy, tiring, and dull. When it seems the moon has disappeared. But it hasn't. It's only hidden behind the clouds, waiting for us to look up again. The moon is always there, shining quietly, waiting for us to be calm enough to notice. So you don't have to choose. You just need to know where you are headed. Sometimes, walking through reality is itself a way of getting closer to your dreams. And sometimes, daring to dream is what makes reality more bearable. Perhaps we may never reach the moon, but simply daring to look up already changes everything. Because in that very moment, we stop living out of fear or obligation and begin to live out of desire. And it is that desire, not the destination, that makes us truly beautiful. Inside every person burns a flame. It's just that most people only ever see the smoke. Van Gogh once said, "Live for the fire within your heart, not for the smoke in other people's eyes." A simple line, yet it carries the essence of life. Because we often live trying to meet the expectations of others and forget to live in alignment with ourselves. From Strickland, who chose art and solitude, to his wife, who chose dignity and independence, and to Strove, the naive soul with a kind heart. Each of them was on their own journey to find freedom and meaning. In their own ways, they were all finding their way back to themselves. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need everyone's understanding or approval. We just need to be real, to live each day with awareness, with gratitude, and with a heart that still knows how to feel. Everyone carries a moon of their own, a dream, a passion, a forgotten piece of their soul. And the journey to find it again is the most complete way to live a life, because nothing is more tragic than spending an entire lifetime without ever being yourself. There will be days when you feel tired, lost, when your moon seems impossibly far away. But remember, it was never gone. All you have to do is look up. It's still there, gentle, bright, and waiting for you to find yourself again. If this video touched something within you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might also need a little light from the moon. Because sometimes, a single ray of light is enough to rekindle the fire in someone's heart. I'm Juliana Grey, your companion on the journey of living slowly, living deeply, and living truly. Thank you for staying with me until the end of today's journey. Keep listening, keep feeling, and keep believing that as long as you hold the fire within your heart, no darkness will ever be able to swallow you.